Hey, welcome to another episode of Connect with KB. It's so great to have you tuning in again as we talk about business, education, leadership, and all the wonderful things that connect us to each other. My guest today is a former multi-client lobbyist who left the world of politics to become an NFL, NIL agent and sports and entertainment attorney. He's jumping right in as things get brewing in the NIL game for name, image, and likeness. That's in college and high school athletics. I want to welcome to the podcast my longtime friend, David Gregory. Dave, thanks. Go ahead.
I stepped on your introduction. Sorry,
okay.
KB. Anyways, thank you for inviting me. It's really great to be back here in downtown Lansing on a beautiful spring day, which there isn't that many of them.
Absolutely.
Here, from what I recall.
It feels good, doesn't it?
Yes.
I'm so glad to have you in studio with me too. And, you know, I have followed your career. You and I have been friends a long time. I want you to start with the Dave Gregory story, kind of tell the listeners how you got to this point, but we're going to jump into your new venture and what you're doing and your willingness to be bold and a risk taker.
Well, thank you. The quick version of my story is I grew up in Suttons Bay, Michigan, in Leelanau County near Traverse City. Went to college at Northern Michigan University, played football up there, and that becomes maybe a little more important later down the road. Came to Lansing to go to law school, started working in government and politics, ultimately ended up at Kelly Cawthorn, the lobbying firm founded by former Attorney General, the late Frank Kelly, and Dennis Cawthorn, former House Republican leader, and the King of Mackinac Island.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, I was there for 23 years. And for 15 of those, I was, in effect, the managing partner. And in that time, we doubled revenues and increased profitability, and was very proud of the time that I had there with my partners and with my colleagues. But I left there at the end of 2021, sold my interest in the company, and started a new venture and a new life.
Yeah. And you kind of got there because of what? I mean, a lot of people talk to me about the fact that, you know, COVID changed them, that they started really kind of rethinking, you know, where do I want to be and what do I want to do? You had a great career and you were good at your job. And so how'd you kind of get to that place?
Well, a couple things. Number one, you know, I talk to people, people ask me, I say it was the number one, the pandemic. It caused me to reassess things. Number two, my parents took ill during that time frame as well, and I had to spend some time with them and deal with that, and made me reassess priorities. But also, I spent 23 years at the same place doing the same thing with largely the same people.
Sure.
And I said, how many people? I would tell people, how many people do you know do that anymore, or anywhere for 10 years, let alone more than 20? And I guess just during the pandemic, I realized maybe I just moved up my time frame. I always knew I wanted to do at least one more act professionally. I thought I was going to be 60 or 62, work another 10 years at Kelly Cawthorn. And then when we started to come back from the pandemic, I said, no, I actually want it to be sooner. Well,
you know, good for you, because a lot of people, you had a great place and it was very comfortable for you. So a big pat on the back to you for stepping out. Let's talk about that, about the next chapter. What is it that you're doing and how'd you get into that?
Well, due to a couple different things, both related to sports and sports marketing and business. Firstly, I created a name, image, and likeness, NIL, consulting and education company with a partner named Trent Clark. And Trent was a Major League Baseball strength coach and won a World Series ring with the California Angels. And he also created many businesses over the years. So we do name, image, and likeness consulting, representation of college athletes. And we're also working on an educational platform and program because we think the vast majority of athletes, college athletes, they don't need an agent to make some NIL dollars. They do need some education. They do need some support materials. They do need some community to basically do it on their own, DIY it, if you will. The Bryce Youngs, the big superstars, they probably need an agent, but the run-of-the-mill athlete, even a non-revenue sport, even at a big school, they can really, if they educated and supported, they can make $1,000 a month or more on their own, just doing their own thing if they've got the right know-how.
Well, I had an opportunity, I'm fascinated by all of this. And so I went back. You take a look at somebody like Bryce Young, and he's making $1 million right now, at least, probably doing this with the NIL.
Yes.
And then, of course, getting ready for the draft. But you take a guy like Joey Hauser, and I saw where I think somewhere along the lines of $200,000 for him. And first of all, you're absolutely right about the education for young people about having that kind of money. How do they manage it? and, partnering with the right people and what they want to do with their reputation. How do you guide someone now there? Do we want to talk about this first, or we want to talk about the draft first?
Well, we'll talk about the draft. We'll talk about this first since we're on the topic. I gained some experience working with young people dealing with brand deals and adult business when they're kind of young, but through my daughters. In particular, my oldest daughter, Hannah, is a pretty significant social media influencer, YouTuber, Instagrammer. She makes a living off it at age 22, but she started when she was 13 or 14, and she started getting, offers of brand deals from companies when she was like 14. So we're like, okay, I have dad's a lawyer and mom's a business person. We had to help guide her. And what do these deals look like? We want to make sure she doesn't get taken advantage of, but we also want to make sure we're not doing everything for her. We want to try to protect her, but also guide her to develop some of her own skills and then stand on her own 2 feet, pick her own advisors. And if she wants our help, picking them out, we do. We wanted her to develop the skills of, why do I have to have a limited liability company? What do I do with taxes? How do I manage my money? How do I manage my time when I'm a 15-year-old, high school student and I've got to get good grades and I've got some other activities and how do I not let this take over my whole life? So time management. Gained a lot of experience working with my own daughter, and that's the kind of skills we try to bring to working with college athletes.
Is there a lot of interest in this right now? And are athletes doing this? I mean, are they connecting with local people in their company, in their communities? Are they connecting with relationships that they already have? And how would someone step into this?
The answer is yes, all of the above.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the vast majority of name, image, and likeness dollars are really through social media and social media posts and brand deals. But other things people are doing are giving lessons, putting on camps, making appearances. They're doing it for charitable reasons, really to raise money or raise awareness for a cause that's near and dear to them, or they're creating their own foundation. But really, I'll give you an example. You can be a football player at Central Michigan University and start to connect with local businesses that you patronize and that you believe in, and offer. This is the following that I have. I'm glad to do a paid post. I already really like your business anyways. This is what a deal might look like. Let's work together. Let's test it out, see how it works. But again, I think college athletes, they have a lot of built-in audiences. They have built-in audiences back in their high school hometown and their high school community. They have it at their university community, the college town itself, the small businesses, and then maybe some of the larger businesses that are around their college sport. Now, Meyer does a lot of work with Michigan State University and University of Michigan athletics, but you can also do deals with a smaller local mom and pop.
Well, you find like a Michigan State, and that they jumped into that pretty early, and with the support of Matt Ishbia and the United Wholesale Mortgage, and supporting both football and basketball, and then of course MSU FCU with the women's basketball, and they're building on that right now too. I think that they're expanding into gymnastics and so many others. So how often would an athlete, I guess, is it up to the company how much exposure they want? Is there kind of an agreement that they will post about them, or obviously they're wearing the stuff on their jerseys and all sorts of things. So are there kind of criteria?
Well, yeah, there's really a couple times. There's team-wide deals,
right?
For the women's volleyball team, for example, and then there'll be standard agreements, I'm sure, for every player with listing responsibilities and timelines and check-ins, and that's best practices because young people really do. Athletes have a lot of demands on their time, and then individual deals, I think, can run the gamut from being very informal to being very formal. And I think, one of the things we do with our company is we try to have sample or template agreements that are professional and cover what needs to be covered without, being 16 pages long. But, we talk to people. Let's say you're just doing an individual deal, not the deal through the team or through United Wholesale. They're paying. They're giving some dollars in exchange for something to the whole team. But let's say you go out and get your own deal. You look a lot more professional if you show up with your own sample agreement with blanks to be filled in to a local business. You may not use your sample agreement, but you certainly create a much greater professional image and reputation if you already come prepared with some of the materials.
Do you think that they can have too many? Can you get into a space where how do you manage that? But you don't want to have, and that's a good, bad problem to have.
I think you can, but to the extent that it's social media based and brand deals and sponsored posts, quite frankly, they're going to be on their phone, on social media, developing content just organically anyways. So to the extent you're doing social media, I think it's really just harnessing some of that time you're already spending on social media and devoting some of that to, your professional NIL work. Because one thing that we learned with my daughter, Hannah Maloche, if she got 100,000 likes on an organic video, just a video she did that was about her life and just one of the things she put out naturally. Then she did a sponsored video where she was promoting a product as part of it. If she got 100,000 likes on the organic one, she would only get 10,000 likes or engagements on the sponsored one. And then people would comment, well, you're a sellout. You're trying to sell to us. And I think one thing she learned is you can't be a walking billboard. Everything you do can't be an advertisement. One of the reasons you're attractive to brands is because you have a following, number one, and number two, athletes have about 5 times the engagement rate of other influencers, just the nature of athletics. So even if they don't have as many followers, they've got a more intense, more interactive following. And you're valuable because people pay attention to you and want to interact with you just as a real person. But if everything you do is an advertisement, people aren't going to want to interact with you anymore. You can't be a human billboard.
You bet. Absolutely. And you got
to be selective.
I had Christina Capron on here a couple of years ago with Christina Capron Fitness, and her husband is John Horford. And Christina had 1 million followers on Instagram. And I think you're right. I think it's about, she had some agreements and deals, but it's that authenticity of people wanting to connect with her more so than anything that she was probably promoting. They like her.
Right.
And I think that's really the thing that people need to remember, that they really need to be their most authentic selves.
Yeah, if everything, and people, I think, get that they're going to be sold to once in a while. Sure. And they're interested to know the products you use and the things that you're interested in. But you can't sell to them all the time, or else your audience goes away and the value that you have goes away.
Well, it's just like anything. It's like any kind of business too. Yeah. They start to think that they're being played a little bit, and
right.
You don't want that. Let's talk about the upcoming draft. You going to be in Kansas City for that, or what will happen in this?
Well, no, I'm not. Okay. Actually, unless you have a first-round draft pick, which I don't this year in my first year, but that's probably the worst place to be for an agent, just because it's. What you have to do is you have to monitor the draft. Who's picking who? You have to be aware of where your clients may go or who's getting drafted. So if they're going to be immediately after the draft, there's a feeding frenzy of undrafted free agent signings. In fact, half the people in the league were not drafted. The draft used to be 14 rounds. Now it's only 7. And the reality is, again, half the players in the league were not drafted. So that's a whole nother part of the process that I think is unknown. And you've got to pay attention to what happens in the draft to know where it might be best for your client to sign with as a free agent.
So tell me a little bit, if you're not going to be there, what are you doing right now there? Do you have a client, and how do you work this with someone to get them exposure?
Well, I have 6 clients, and one I'll focus in on particular because he's just gotten some national media recognition, and he's a good representative example. His name is Jake Witt. He's an offensive tackle from Northern Michigan University, my alma mater. He used to play tight. Really, it's an interesting story. He's from Ewan Trout Creek, tiny little town in the Upper Peninsula. He was the valedictorian of his graduating class of 16, so he's very proud of that. Excuse me, it's a very small town, and he played a little 8-man football, played some basketball. He went to college actually for basketball originally, and then said, I just want to be a student. So he transferred from Michigan Tech to Northern, is just a student for a year, and then the strength coach and some football guys see this 6'7", broad-shouldered, very athletic guy working out. Like, you got to come out for the football team. He's like, sure, I played 8-man football in high school. I'll give it a whirl. And then he plays tight end. Excuse me. And then he gets moved to tackle at halftime of a game because there's injuries, and he's 6'7", and they teach him at halftime for 5 minutes. He plays the best defense in the country at Ferris State. They won 2 national championships. He does pretty well. They move him to tackle, and then all of a sudden he starts to attract a little bit of interest from scouts. But just a little bit of interest because he was very raw. He didn't really know the position. He's coming from a smaller school. So he signed with me at the end of the season last year. And one of the first things we do is we select a trainer, and the agent pays for the training out of their pocket. That's one thing I learned very quickly. So we selected Advantage Sports in Marquette, which is where he had been training all along, and they had trained other guys that had made it in the NFL. So he starts training for essentially an 8 to 10 week period to get ready for a pro day. And a long story short, he did get invited to an all-star game. He declined it. He thought, look, I've got to put on weight. I'm going to go down there. They're going to say that I'm a 6'7" skinny guy, and they're going to write me off because I'm from a small school. I got to put on some weight and bulk up a little bit. So he did. And he went to the pro day at Central Michigan University on March 15th. And he did exactly what we had hoped he would do, which is have a completely breakout performance. And basically his performance was in the top 2% all time for offensive tackles.
Great.
That's something called the relative athletic score. He's 6'7", 302 pounds. He did a vertical jump of 37 inches, which would have been first place if he'd gone to the combine in Indianapolis. He broad jumped 10 foot 3 inches, which would have been first place at the combine in Indianapolis, and is a record for offensive linemen all time. And then he ran a 4.89 40 at 6'7", 302 pounds. And that would have been the fastest time at the combine out of any offensive tackle. And then he did position work. There were scouts from about 30 teams there. And a handful of teams were aware of him, and they really had their eye on him. But then a lot of people I didn't know who this guy was. So a crowd of about 20 scouts swarmed him after his workout. It looked like he was holding a press conference.
Very cool.
And then all of a sudden he becomes a hot property, and really even gets profiled in The Athletic, which is it's a sports media property owned by the New York Times.
You bet.
So all of a sudden he's a hot property. He's rising. It's who is Jake Witt, and now he's taking so-called top 30 visits. He's visited the San Francisco 49ers, for example, and the Denver Broncos, and he's had private workouts up in Marquette for the Colts and the Eagles. So very likely he went from small school, complete unknown, to who is this guy, to it's very likely he will get drafted in a couple weeks.
Well, that is great for you and the exposure for you. And, this has got to still all be a learning experience for you, too. You've
very
got
much.
the first one. You're going to get the first guy drafted.
Yep.
Work on the other 5.
Yep.
And then, you just don't know how big this business could actually be for you. Let's talk a little bit about that, just about Bullrush Sports,
okay.
Kind of where you are. What do you see here going into the next year, 5 years? What does this look like for Dave Gregory?
Well, that's a good question. Again, I got 6 total guys, and want to get the rest of those guys in a camp and get an opportunity to make a team. And that's just as important as Jake. But Jake is really just a good example of what we're doing. So hopefully, I hope all 6 of them make a team. Some of them may get into a camp and then get on a practice squad, so they're not part of the active roster, but they make some money, and then they have a chance to progress as the years go along. Some of them might get a shot and then have to go to the XFL or the USFL, but there's a lot of other professional leagues. There's more opportunities now for football players than there ever have been. So there's alternative leagues that are very viable, that have broadcasting contracts and decent salaries, and a track record of guys who do well there getting another chance in the NFL. So, look, I have to get through this draft class, see how these guys do, get them in some camps, and then I've got to start working, and I already am working on next year's draft class, and hopefully have another 4 or 5 players in next year's draft class. I've really got to start recruiting them now. I've got a few candidates that I'm working with, and do the same thing all over again with them. And then hopefully 4 or 5 years down the road, I've got if I have 5, 6 guys a year, maybe more if I get, bring somebody on to help, maybe I have 10 or 15 guys in the league in a few years, or 20 guys in the league. And then that's a real business at that point.
Well,
but right now I'm just spending a lot of money on the players.
It's okay. This is okay. David, this is such an exciting time for you. I can tell it's all over your face in regards to this, next chapter for you. I have great faith that Jake's going to be successful. It's going to work out. One of my favorite movies is Draft Day with Kevin Costner. Is it really as strategic as that is, like when they talk about, the whole thing about Vontae Mack, no matter what, he was going to draft him regardless of how the whole thing happened. Is that kind of fictional, or is this really kind of how strategic it goes?
Well, I've read a lot of things about that movie and how realistic it is or it isn't. But obviously some things are Hollywoodized. Sure. It has to be. It's a movie. But I read something recently where Bill Belichick, New England Patriots, 6 Super Bowls, when he became a head coach of the Patriots, which is second go around, the first time with the Browns didn't work out so well, and he met with Jimmy Johnson formerly of the Cowboys and University of Miami, who was famous for being a very good and strategic in the draft. And Jimmy Johnson told Belichick, he's like, look, you can overthink it. Make a list of the guys that you really want no matter what. And if you have to reach and take them a little earlier than the experts say you should, trust your own judgment. So I don't know, maybe they got that in Draft Day from Jimmy Johnson saying, you should make a list of the 3 or 4 guys that you want no matter what. And that maybe if you like them that much, maybe you pick them a little earlier than the experts say. So I think there's a real kernel of truth there.
Yeah. What are some of the greatest lessons that you've learned on this entire journey, even this new chapter for you?
Well, I think the value of mentors is incredibly important. And, I certainly had a lot of great mentors in my life. I played football for Buck Nystrom, a familiar name to a lot of Michigan State fans, who was an All-American here in the 50s. And he's Vince Nystrom's uncle. Yep. He passed away a couple years ago. Dennis Cawthorn, Frank Kelly. Frank was elected statewide 10 times. He's a pretty good mentor. But in my new career, I have a mentor, and I work with a company called Inside the League. And Neil Stratton runs that company. And you take there's a test to become an NFLPA certified agent. There's only a pass rate of about 40%. So it's a serious test. Anyways, I took his draft prep course, study guide materials. And then once you become an agent, you're one of his guys or gals. Yep. And we have there's a lot of very successful female football agents, and there's more all the time. And there's a lot more women in football coaching and front offices too, which I think is fantastic.
I do too. Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah. And so it's exciting. But anyways, Neil then spends, for no charge, just because you've been one of his people and loyal to him, then he spends a year with all rookie agents that are in his stable, having a monthly Zoom call, available to text him anytime, and walking you through your first draft season about how it all works. And then he brings experts in, current scouts, former scouts, and you discuss every aspect of the draft process, compare notes. So again, I'm 54 years old, and I have a mentor. So I think it's important.
I think it's important too. And the thing is, Dave, first of all, you should have your own podcast, okay? I think the Bullrush Sports podcast and this educational opportunity in NIL is something you should consider. You've got a great voice for it.
Well, thank you.
But you know what? Your passion for this and the way that you handle yourself and people, I know that you're going to be successful. And I hope you'll come back and talk to me. Let's connect again after Jake gets drafted and see how that journey goes.
All right. Hey, and maybe some other guys are going to make some teams too. Dallas Dixon, wide receiver from Central Michigan, is another name, maybe familiar to mid-Michigan folks. But yeah, I'd be glad to come back and tell you how they're doing and talk more about NIL or anything. I just like talking to you, KB.
I like talking to you, too,
I really
David.
Appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. My guest today, good friend, David Gregory with Bullrush Sports. I also want to thank my supporting sponsors, Governmental Consultant Services, Downing Industries, AF Group, Public Affairs Associates, Mercantile Bank, and the Leaderboard, Grand Rapids' new premier golf simulator experience. You can listen to all my podcasts at connectwithkb.com. Until we connect again, go live your best life. I'm your host, Kristen Belzer.